What were key commodities in Portuguese trade in Africa? If you're curious about the commodities that drove the Portuguese trade in Africa, you're about to uncover a fascinating history. Let's start with the early days of Portuguese exploration and trade. One of the primary reasons the Portuguese ventured into Africa was the quest for gold. King John I of Portugal was keen to access the gold-producing areas of West Africa, which were previously controlled by trans-Saharan trade routes. This gold was crucial for trading spices, silks, and other luxuries from India. As the Portuguese established trading stations along the west coast of Africa, they began to divert the gold trade away from the trans-Saharan routes. They built forts in places like Cape Blanco, Sierra Leone, and Elmina to protect their trading stations from rival European traders. Slaves were another key commodity. The Portuguese started capturing Africans as early as 1441 and shipping them to Portugal. This practice expanded significantly, with Prince Infante de Henrique selling African slaves in Lagos from 1444. The papal bulls of 1452 to 1456 granted the Portuguese monopoly over the slave trade along the African coast. The demand for slaves skyrocketed with the establishment of sugar plantations on islands like São Tomé and Príncipe in the 1490s, and later in Brazil in the 1530s. Slaves were used to work on these plantations, making sugar one of the major commodities traded by the Portuguese. São Tomé became the largest producer of sugar for Europe during this period. Agricultural products were also significant. The Portuguese introduced crops like maize, sugarcane, and tobacco from South America to Africa. In the 19th century, coffee plantations were introduced to Angola, and coffee remains one of Angola's major exports today. In addition to these commodities, the Portuguese traded guns, cloth, and other European luxuries with African kingdoms. These goods were exchanged for slaves, particularly in regions like Luanda and Benguela. The introduction of guns significantly changed the nature of warfare in these regions, allowing the Portuguese and their allies to dominate other kingdoms. The trade network was extensive, with the Portuguese establishing a bilateral route between Luanda and Brazil, sending approximately 10,000 enslaved people to Brazil every year. Later, East African markets also supplied enslaved Africans to the transatlantic trade. In summary, the key commodities in Portuguese trade in Africa included gold, slaves, sugar, agricultural products like maize and coffee, and European goods such as guns and cloth. These commodities played a central role in shaping the economic and social landscape of both Africa and the Portuguese colonies.